Welcome to this video on Storm on the Island, one of the poems in the Power and Conflict Poetry Cluster for English Literature, Paper 2. So as with previously, make sure you've read the poem at least twice. This poem is quite complex in terms of trying to actually understand what is going on. So it's quite short, but it is really important that you've read it a couple of times first. So pause the video and just read through it twice. Once you've read through the poem, then we can start to look at the bits on the other side where we can pick out what's actually going on. So firstly, and you don't need to write any of this down because this is the basics, the stuff that you should just know. What is this poem about? Its literal meaning. It's about a community of islanders who are preparing for a storm. Metaphorically then, its deeper meaning is about the power or the battle of nature versus man. And this fits into the kind of power element of power and conflict. So we can see that the storm is hitting the island, the storm representing nature, and the people living on the island, the community representing humanity. But it also has a secondary meaning in terms of conflict. Now the poem is set on the Aran Islands in Northern Ireland, and the poet Seamus Heaney is Northern Irish. And at the time that he was writing this poem in 1966 was the start of what is known as the Troubles, which ended in the kind of was the beginning, of the conflict between different cultural groups in Ireland. And so in this sense, the poem can be read as an extended metaphor for the political troubles between the Republic of Ireland, that's what we think of as the sort of, I was going to say Southern Ireland, but it's really all of Ireland apart from the very bit in the north, and Northern Ireland. Okay, so where I've put ROI and NI there, that's what they stand for, Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Okay, so this other metaphorical meaning can be that the storm is an extended metaphor for the political troubles between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. So as we said, the poet Seamus Heaney is Northern Irish. He's also Catholic, and he then moved to the Republic of Ireland. So he's lived in these two different countries essentially that are united in the sense that they're on one piece of land. The poem itself is set on the Aran Islands, and the Aran Islands themselves are a really strong symbol of Irish culture. As I've said, the poem was published in 1966, which was the start of the Troubles. And there's a little bit of context about the Troubles in Ireland here. So I'm not going to go into all the background, but if you are interested, I can signpost you to a video for that. But the Protestant Unionists wanted Northern Ireland to stay as part of the UK. And that's the situation that we have now, where Northern Ireland is classed as part of the UK. Just notice my incorrect spelling of Catholic there, so apologies about that. It shouldn't have an extra O in it. Whereas the Catholics were often known as nationalists or Republicans. And they wanted Northern Ireland to be returned to be part of the Republic of Ireland. Okay, so Ireland did all used to be one country, but historically, a long time ago, it was split. And so those Catholic nationalists or Catholic Republicans wanted Northern Ireland to be returned to be part of the Republic of Ireland. So you've got a kind of geographical split between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and also between two different groups of Christians, both Christians, but the Catholics and Protestants have slightly different beliefs. And so you've got this kind of religious tension as well. And that led to ultimately what is essentially a civil war, infighting within the country and terrorist attacks by the IRA, which was the Irish Republican Army, so the Republicans, the Catholics, and that tension then against the Union paramilitary, the Protestants. Let's have a look at the title then. So Storm on the Island. The word storm symbolises the power of nature. The idea of island could mean Ireland as in the country, But it also, if we think about what it means to be on an island, it means to be isolated and to be cut off. And so there's a certain sense of vulnerability here. The people on the island are vulnerable versus the storm being, a real powerful symbol of nature. There's no it's not the storm or the storm on the island. So we get a sense that it's not a specific storm, it's just a generalized storm on the island. And this implies that storms are maybe a regular occurrence in this place. Again, if we think about this idea of the conflict, the political conflict, then this is also alluded to in the title, because if you put the first word storm together with on and then the T of storm on the island, so storm on t, Stormont is the name of Northern Ireland's government buildings. So again, this ties in the kind of political metaphorical meaning that could be going on in this poem. Pause the video here, make sure you've got those notes on, certainly the metaphorical meaning, the context and the title. So we're going to look at the poem in sections. Let's look at the first few lines. The poem, like many of the other poems in this cluster, is a dramatic monologue. So it's first person, but it's first person plural because it says we rather than I. So if we think about some of the other dramatic monologues we've got in the cluster, like My Last Duchess, it can be compared to them. Also, because it's a dramatic monologue, we're only getting one side of the story. We're only getting this one version. So there's a certain amount of bias, and it's really heavily influenced by perspective here. Key thing that I want to look at here is this first three words. We are prepared. The word we is a really interesting use of pronoun here. It suggests community and unity and solidarity. Now, if we think about this as well, we know Seamus Heaney was a Catholic, and we've got this sense of solidarity between these two different groups. If you've got something saying we, then you've also sort of by implication got the sense, that there's an other side, us versus them. So there's sort of this implied idea that there's an opposition as well. So the we are prepared, well, is this the Catholics who are prepared for fighting with the Protestants? Or is it the we, the community on the island, ready to fight the storm? And we don't know, so we need to say perhaps this, maybe that. And this phrase here, we are prepared, is just a declarative sentence. It's just stating a fact. But it comes across in terms of tone as very confident and very bold compared to the ending when the writer seems much more full of fear. And there's a real sense of optimism here, that they are ready. And if we look at some of the other words here, I've picked these out in blue. You've got prepared, squat, sink, rock, slate. And these are all symbols of words to do with strength and protection. Also some to do with nature, like slate and rock, tough materials. But we get this idea here that the community of islanders, they've adapted their life to stand up to the power of the storms. They're ready for this conflict, whether we're saying that that's conflict with the storm, or whether we're saying that's conflict with, another political group in Ireland. But we've also got a sense of hardship on the life on the island here. The wizened earth has never troubled us with hay, so it can't even grow any hay. They can't grow crops. So as you say, there are no stacks or stooks that can be lost. Now these are kind of like piles of hay, like stacked up. So they're saying that we've got nothing, so we've got nothing to lose, nor are there trees. So we've got a real sense of emptiness on the island as well, focusing on what they don't have. They don't have crops, they don't have hay, they don't have trees. And you might describe the writer as being quite stoic or stoical. And if you're stoic, you kind of put up with things when they're hard going. So he seems quite tolerant of the difficulties. He's putting up with the hardship of nature and the hardship of life on this island. But again, maybe this is an extended metaphor for the hardship of life in Ireland, as in Ireland, as in the country. But he's willing to do that. He's willing to put up with that hardship. Let's have a look then as the poem carries on. It says, nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows full blast. And they use the word company twice in this poem. And so again, he's saying that there aren't any trees for company. So actually what he's saying is the place is empty and there's nothing there. And therefore we get this idea of loneliness and isolation. And what I've noted here is that the islands are united against the storm and they seem like a strong community, but they are betrayed by nature. So they're prepared, they're ready for this fight, but actually, they seem to be against nature. Not only does the island not grow any crops, it doesn't grow any trees, it doesn't give them any kind of company or friendship or anything. And then on top of that, they're then attacked by this storm. Then we get this interesting phrase here, which again is another key quote. You know what I mean. We've talked about colloquial language before when we were looking at remains. Remember, this means kind of everyday language. It's not slang here, but it's not what you would expect to see in a poem. It's like this kind of offhand comment that you might make in a conversation. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. So the way that the writer is talking to the reader, saying, you know what I mean, is kind of normalizing this sort of having to put up with the weather. He says, you know what I mean, when he's talking about the storm blowing full blast. And so we get this sense that it's quite normal dealing with this type of conflict, whether that be the political conflict or dealing with this kind of weather, the conflict with the storm. And again, we get a lot of violent language as well. So in this section of the poem, I've picked out two words here, blast and pummels. You might even want to talk about the plosive alliteration. I've not actually noticed that here with these sounds, p and b. But the words both seem quite violent and they seem like a real physical attack. And we've got a semantic field of conflict here. We'll look at these other words that I've noted down here as well. We'll look at them later on. But maybe he's using the semantic field of conflict and these violent words to suggest how dangerous and threatening the storm is. Or again, remember, maybe he's trying to suggest that actually this storm is an extended metaphor for the political troubles in Ireland. Make sure you keep pausing the video to get these notes down before you move on. So let's look at the next bit. He says, but there are no trees, no shelter. You might think that the sea is company, exploding comfortably down on the cliffs. So he's described the fact that there's nothing in the fields, nothing grows, and there's no trees. Now he moves on to something else. And again, he's talking directly to us. So you might think this about the sea. And again, we see that word company. But again, the sea tricks him because you think it's going to be company, and yet it's not. Now this again is a really key quotation here, exploding comfortably. If something explodes, it seems dangerous, so you're unlikely to describe it as comfortable. An oxymoron is where you've got two ideas that are in complete conflict with each other. So this suggests on one hand that you can't trust nature in the same way that they can't trust the storm. Something that you think should provide comfort, like the gentle soft sound of the sea, is actually explosive. So this is where we get this idea that nature is unpredictable. And it could also suggest that the speaker has got used to these storms. He's got used to the seas raging and the sort of sense of the stormy sea. And so it's almost become comfortable for him now. It's almost just become part of who he is. And therefore it's now a source of comfort because it's become normal. So this is a really interesting line to explore. And then he carries on describing the sea, and he says, the spray from the sea spits like a tame cat turns savage. And again, we've got this really sinister simile here, where something that should be safe and protective, the tame cat, has turned savage, turned against them. And you can really see how this could then really be an extended metaphor for the conflict in Ireland, the troubles in Ireland, this kind of political conflict, because, in the same way that the sea has turned against them, maybe the Catholics and the people in the Republic of Ireland felt like their own people, their own land, had turned against them, because it was the Protestant Northern Irish who originally had been all part of the country of Ireland who are now turning against them. This is not an outsider or someone from a different country who's fighting them. This is their own people. So in the same way that nature is turning against the island, and the sea is fighting its own island, and so on and so on, Heaney might be trying to describe the way that this idea of the Civil War, it was people fighting against themselves, Irish people fighting against other Irish people. They wouldn't see it like that. The Northern Irish would not want to be identified as the same as the Catholic Republic of people who live in the Republic of Ireland, because their identity was very separated. What we see in this quotation as well, in spits like a tame cat turns savage, is this repetition of the t, the s sound, and this might mimic the hissing and spitting sound of a cat or of a kind of violent sea. And then what's interesting is, what do? Well, they just sit tight. To sit tight means that you do nothing. So they are passive, they're not actively fighting back against this storm. Maybe they're just waiting for the storm to pass. And you might say that this makes them seem weak or vulnerable as a group of people. Or it might actually be a sense of acceptance, that they've just accepted that this is part of life, this is a way of life. And again, there is still tension between Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland now. And so the people who live there have, in the same way that you might get used to a storm, they've got used to this continual sort of political undercurrent and this disagreement, to the extent that the schools are still separated. You get Protestant and Catholic schools where children go to school separately, and that is still the case now. So this sense of kind of getting used to living with violence, getting used to living with this tension, does apply in a political way to the Republic of Ireland and to Northern Ireland. Pause the video now, make sure you've got all those notes down on those quotations. So now we get to the end of the poem. As we said, it's not a particularly long poem, but there are some really key quotations. So we've got that line that we've just looked at, we just sit tight, and then we've got, while the wind dives and strafes invisibly, space is a salvo, we are bombarded with the empty air. Strange, it is a huge nothing that we fear. Now I've picked out quite a few bits here. Some of these words that we talked about earlier when we were talking about pummels and blasts, we've got more military language here, okay? So, and words to do with conflict. So bombarded, savage, strafes, salvo. Strafes and salvo pretty much have the same meaning. They both mean either a repeated attack or a simultaneous attack from gunfire or bombs. So, we've got this sense that the islanders and the island itself is under repeated attack from the storm. Or again, this is where we might see this political idea coming through, because actually there was sort of repeated military presence and terrorist attacks in Ireland. And this is where, again, we've got to really pull out this idea that maybe the storm itself is an extended metaphor for the political troubles in Ireland. So the storm maybe could represent the Northern Islands, the Unionists, the Northern Irish, the Unionists, and the island could represent the Republic of Ireland, the Catholics, of which Heaney would have counted himself as one. We've also got words to do with nothingness. Space is a salvo, so it's saying space is a repeated attack. That's what it basically means, that line. We're bombarded with the empty air. Well, how can you be bombarded with nothing? How can you be attacked by nothing? But again, maybe, and I keep using the word maybe or perhaps, because we're really saying this, trying to put on this extended metaphor, alternative interpretation. Maybe he's saying like we're being attacked by nothing, that there isn't really anything to worry about. Or maybe it means that they feel like they've got nothing to protect them from the storm or the conflict. And then this final line It is a huge nothing that we fear. Maybe he's saying that they shouldn't be scared of nature, that the storm will pass. Maybe he's sort of saying, look, that's just natural, it's part of life. Or maybe this idea that it is a huge nothing that we fear. Again, if we think about it in terms of the political conflict, he's saying, this is crazy, like we're just scared of people who are just ourselves. We're scared of nothing. We're scared of, fellow humans. We're scared of, fellow Irish people. So maybe that's what that line means when he's saying it is a huge nothing that we fear. But the last word in this poem is fear. And actually, if we think back to the beginning, it started off by saying we are prepared. So over the course of the poem, he's kind of talked himself into a state of fear and a state of isolation and a state of loneliness where he's cut himself off because he realises that nothing on the island is there to keep him company, not the trees, not the sea, and so on and so on. So sometimes when you get to the end of the poems, you think, okay, I kind of understand it, but there's lots of bits that I don't understand. And that's absolutely fine. We only need a few bits that we can talk about for this poem and have a general understanding. It doesn't matter if you don't feel like you understand the whole thing. Pause the video here. Make sure you've got these notes before you move on. There's also a few really important comments to make about structure. Firstly, just when you look at it on the page, you can see that it's one long verse. And the sentences as well are really long and complex. So what might the effect of this be? Well, this one long verse and these really long sentences are overwhelming, just like the overwhelming power of nature. I've picked out 2 examples of enjambment. You would not be able to quote these in the exam, so it would be absolutely fine just to say that the writer uses enjambment. Okay, that's absolutely fine. And remember that enjambment is when a long sentence then goes on into subsequent lines. So we can see nor are the trees, that sentence carries on over 6 lines. And then the same with you might think that the sea is company. It carries on into 5 lines. So we get a huge amount of information, a barrage of information. And if you're kind of being barraged, then you're kind of being bombarded. And this reflects the bombardment of the storm on the island, or the storm on the house on the island, and also the kind of relentless conflict which the islanders were living under, the kind of political conflict, as well as the conflict from the storm. There's no rhyme in this poem apart from these kind of half rhymes that I've picked out in blue in the sort of opening and closing couplets. So remember, we want to try and make a connection between the structure and the effect. So the fact that there is no rhyme, there is a lack of rhyme, suggests that there is also a lack of control. The islanders cannot control the storm, it is uncontrollable. They also cannot control and don't seem to be able to put an end to the political conflict in Ireland. So you can link the lack of rhyme to the political conflict or the conflict with the storm. What we have got in the first 2 lines and the last 2 lines, these couplets, is half rhymes. Now half rhymes is when the word literally half rhymes. So you can see that squat and slate both finish with a t sound, squat, slate, but the o and a are the vowel sounds, so they don't quite rhyme. And the same with air and fear. They both end with the r sound, but air and ear don't really rhyme. So it's just that consonant towards the end of each word. The consonant sound, doesn't matter that actually there's an E on the end of slate, but the sound is creating a half of a rhyme. And this creates a cyclical structure because what we have at the end, we also have at the beginning. Okay, so in this sense, we get this idea that the storm or the conflict is inescapable. And this storm will continue to occur time and time again. It's not just one storm. Remember, it's not the storm on the island, it's storm on the island, more generalised. Pause the video here, make sure you've got all the notes that you need on structure. So to summarise, what do we need to say about the writer's ideas? Maybe Heaney is trying to write about the hardship of life and the need to endure, whether that is endure nature, or whether it's endure the state of violence because of the political troubles in Ireland. Maybe the writer's trying to explore the feelings of living in this permanent state of conflict and how it creates this heightened sense of fear. And again, just because I want to really push this, if you're going to write about this poem, it's really important that you understand this extended metaphor, that maybe the storm itself is a metaphor for Ireland's political troubles. Okay, if you end up just writing about the kind of storm meaning, the first level meaning, layer of meaning, then it might be hard to get some of those high marks. Themes then: power and powerlessness. Nature is powerful, man is powerless, and in that sense it's a really strong link with Ozymandias, where the power of nature is greater than the power of humans. So you can write about this as a poem to do with power, powerlessness of people, powerful fullness of nature. You can write it about it in terms of conflict, so conflict with the weather, in which case it links really well with exposure. And you could write about the conflict between the people, the Irish people as well. So best poems are the ones that link with the power of nature, but it certainly can link with loads of other poems with the idea of conflict. So remember, this is a really good slide in terms of revision. I've picked out some of the key prompts and techniques that I used. You should be able to write them down, for example, on a flashcard. So you might write the prompts on one side and then have your notes on the other. Again, you might want to have a flashcard where you put the quotations on one side and then write notes about them on the other. But you should be able to write about all of those prompts and all of those quotations once you have watched this video. And that will help you commit these things to memory. Then finally, there's just a reminder of the other revision techniques that you can use in order to revise this poem. Hope that video was helpful.